real quick, just before I introduce everybody, I want to make sure you guys can see us and that we're actually here. So if you would, in the chat there, give us a thumbs up or let us know, say where you're from, things like that. And oh, I see Hugh Brown. Hey, Hugh, how you doing? I know Hugh. Thank you, Hugh, for mentioning something there. Denver in the house. All right, so we know we have at least Hugh there and Baroon from Canada. Wonderful, great. So it seems like folks are hearing us okay and everything. And we've got Manana from San Jose. Nice, great. I'm loving seeing everybody dialing in here today. All right, great. So it seems like everyone is able to hear us and everything. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. What do you think, Ojus? Are you ready? You want to do this today?
We can get started. And hello to whoever is from San Jose. That's where I'm from too. So nice to see you guys.
Yeah, that'll be, matter of fact, there'll be definitely an opportunity to connect later at the end. So with that, without further ado, I am David Jones-Gilardi, Developer Relations Engineer at DataStax. I'm joined today by Ojus Save from Zoom. Ojus, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody who you are, what you're doing.
Hey guys, my name is Ojus. I work as a part of the developer ecosystem here at Zoom. I am. Can I ask a question to the audience, David, if it's okay?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So over there, you have an option to raise your hand, and I have a question for all you guys. How many of you folks have used Zoom beyond our meeting? Just raise your hand, or do some
Is it
sign.
wrong if I raise my hand too? Like, can I?
You can absolutely raise your hand.
Oh, I see the hands coming up. Cool, cool, cool. Let's see.
Okay. Wow. So you guys have used Zoom beyond its meetings. Like, for example, have you used Zoom chat or calendar, scheduler, or what? Nice. This is
All the
this is this is
above.
so cool. All the above. That that is so cool. So let me go ahead and quickly share my screen. This is like a small presentation I prepared for
Yeah.
today's session. Um, it's just I have to show this. My legal has asked me to show this. I'm not going to spend too much time here. But the good part is for all the Zoom products that are out there, we have a developer counterpart of that. Means you can use Zoom's technology to build either applications using Zoom's data or applications on top of Zoom, or you can bring your own applications into Zoom. We're not going to go over that in detail today. Please go to developers.zoom.us to explore more. But just wanted to give you guys a quick idea on what's possible with the Zoom developer platform. Yeah, want me to go ahead, David, with a presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a matter
Okay.
of fact, as we tee that up, so one other thing from a housekeeping standpoint, I saw Hugh is on. We've been in the past, we usually use a different system. We're using Zoom today. Hey, that kind of makes sense since we are working together with Zoom. But the same kind of thing applies. So if you want to ask a question, we have the general chat. Feel free to have discussion, right? Feel free to say things and talk with each other. That's totally fine. If you have a question for one of us, what we ask you to do in your toolbar down there in Zoom, there should be a Q&A section. Go ahead and put your question in the Q&A. And that way we can kind of tee things up and kind of see what we have going. And that way, if other people are interested in those questions, they can upvote them as well. All right. So with that, Ojus, why don't I guess we should probably explain to everybody what we did, right? And what we're doing here today.
Right. So I hope no one joined this meeting assuming, joined this webinar assuming we have built another meeting bot, but we have built another bot. It's just on Zoom Teams chat. Um, so basically, we'll walk you through like what we are going to do. But here are some prerequisites. In order to do that, we recommend that you have a paid version of Zoom so that you are able to call the APIs. Now, just know that there is no extra cost to call the Zoom APIs. It's just that if you have a license for that product, you can call that API. What I mean by that is, let's say you have a free Zoom account, then you can call the APIs to let's say, create a meeting for your user or maybe update a meeting. But you cannot call the APIs for cloud recording just because you do not have the cloud recording license. So if
Mm,
you had like the basic paid version of the Zoom license, you would be able to call the cloud recording APIs for your own account. We want to make sure that one of the things that you also need is you have to configure your Zoom app and Zoom chatbot. I will show you how to do that. And of course, you have to select required scopes in your Zoom app. I will walk you guys through that.
And then before
So,
you get going on that core content there, Ojus, and then the flip side of that is once Ojus kind of shows you how to do things from the Zoom end, then I'm going to take it and we're going to show you how to do things from the DataStax AI platform end. Because at the end of the day, like what we're doing here, right, is we've built a RAG-based system that will take your Zoom meeting summaries, transcriptions, things like that, and then allow you to interact with that data in real time, right? And so you can actually use an LLM with a generative AI flow to interact with that data from your meetings and such like that. So we're going to show you how to do all those things. So I'll follow Ojus. All right, sorry, Ojus, go ahead.
absolutely. So, as David said, we're building like a RAG chatbot. What we are actually doing is we are getting data from your Zoom account, and we are going to basically make an API call to get the data. And once we have that data, we are going to go ahead and input that into DataStax. So in order to do this, we are first going to get a list of all the users within your account. Then for every user, we're going to see how many recordings that they have for the last 6 months. You'll ask me like, why not more? The reason being, with our APIs, we can only get the data for the last 6 months. And then once you have the recordings API also gives you the meeting ID for that recording. So using that meeting ID, we are going to also get the meeting summary data for that API. Once you get all these details, we are basically going to convert it into this schema. We're going to extract all the data from these APIs. We're going to convert it into this schema, and then we are going to push it to DataStax. Let me quickly walk you guys through. Sorry. Let me quickly walk you guys through. Oops. Apologize. Okay. Let me quickly walk you guys through some of the APIs that we're going to use. So as I mentioned, we're first going to call the list users API at Zoom. So what this API is going to do is it's going to get a list of all the users within your account. And we're going to get the data, like for example, oh, it's not mentioning. Okay. It's going to get the first name. Okay, yeah. So it's going to get the first name of the user, and I believe it's going to get the last name. It's going to get the user
Right.
ID. It's going to get the user email. These are the 4 fields that we're going to grab from the user's API. Then using the user ID, which is going to be unique for all the users, we are going to call the cloud recordings API for that user. We're going to call the cloud recordings API for the user. And the cloud recordings API is going to give us some additional details about the recording. Like, for example, the account ID, how long the meeting went for, the description of the meeting, the number of recordings that meeting had. And the most important thing that we need from these recordings for work today is the VTT file. I don't think we have mentioned that in the schema yet, but if you end up calling the Cloud Recordings API, you will see like one of the fields is, it says like, okay, recordings, and then it will say like, like what kind of a file it is. So we are extracting that VTT file and adding it into the custom schema that we built. After that, we're going to call this meeting summary API for that meeting as well. Because again, remember, VTT file is going to have the whole transcript of the meeting. And then the summary is going to be the meeting summary that is generated by the Zoom meeting AI summarizer. Note that not every meeting will have the AI summarizer turned on. So sometimes it is possible that this API might return an empty response. But assuming we get data from both the APIs, we're going to push all of that data to DataStax.
And
Um,
and one thing I'd like to point out as well, and Ojus, correct me if I'm off on this, but like all the various APIs that you're talking about to get all the information, the GitHub repo that we're going to share with you today and the code actually coalesces all that stuff together, right? Like we've done the work to hook up to those
Hook up
APIs and kind of pull it
exactly.
together. So if you're like, okay, yeah, there's a set of APIs here, I have to learn these things, and that's kind of normal for any kind of service like this. The code will have the examples, like a working example of actually working with these APIs, and you can kind of see how that comes together.
Absolutely. And yeah, once we've basically inputted this data into DataStax, we're going to query the data through our Zoom Teams chatbot. So, for example, if I end up asking, like, hey, tell me some of the most common faced issues in my past meetings, it's basically going to, what happens is, and here, let me move on to the next part. This is
Yeah.
what our architecture looks like. So essentially, when you send a message to Zoom Teams chat, it will see if the message is update or if it's any other message. If it's an update message, it's going to follow the flow that previously explained. Like it's going to get a list of all the users. For every user, it's going to get the list of the meeting recording. And for every user, it's again going to get the list of meeting summary data. It's going to input it into DataStax. Once it is done, it's going to send a confirmation back into your Zoom Teams chat. After that, if you end up querying your database, as I said, like one of the queries could be tell me some of the most common problems that I faced during my meetings or like most common problems that were discussed during my meetings. It's going to basically get that data through DataStax.
Right.
We're using an LLM to generate responses, and the response will be sent back to your Zoom Teams chat. And again, we are going to show you all of that. So that's all from the slides, and I will quickly walk you guys through on like how to configure the Zoom Marketplace app. And once I show you guys that, David can then walk us through the next and the most important step. Someone mentioned they cannot see anything at the moment.
Oh.
Were you not able to see my screen? Okay. Uh, Benson Evans, you might see two tabs into your Zoom meeting. You might just want to switch to there should be another tab which will switch to my screen, basically.
Do you mean I see one that says webinar, but one that is Ojus Save screen?
Yeah. So you might
Got
want to
you.
switch on to that tab.
And it does look like other people can see through. So thank you for the feedback, by the way, to let us know on that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
okay. All right. Okay.
Oops. I'm still getting used to that command, you know.
We made a last moment change to the way that Ojus was doing things, like literally seconds before we came out today. So don't. Sorry for that.
Here. Okay. This should be good enough. Okay. So as I said, in order to get your data, you would have to create an app in the marketplace. So go to marketplace.zoom.us, sign in into your account. Once you sign in, hit develop, click build an app, and then go ahead and select a general app. I have ended up creating a lot of apps, so I'm just going to select the one that I've already created. So this is basically what my app is going to look like. You have two options. One is admin managed, the other is user managed. The simple example I like to give in order to differentiate between admin managed and user managed is think of admin managed as an admin in your account, like they have all the information, and a user managed as an individual user. The type of app that you're building is more suited to be a user managed app because we're getting one single user's data. But let's say if you wanted to build this app on a admin level, like for example, get data from like every single user within your account, you would go ahead and build this as an admin managed app. Once you create an app, you would also get a client ID, client secret. We are going to use this client ID and client secret to generate our access token. Um, and then you have OAuth redirect URL. I would not worry about that. You're just building a Zoom Teams chatbot. But essentially, this OAuth redirect URL is essential if you are generating an access token for a user authorized OAuth. So what happens is once Zoom authorizes, or once your user authorizes your integration, this is where Zoom would redirect the user to. So for example, in this case, if I do like HTTPS zoom.us and hit save, once my user authorizes its integration, it will send it to basically that URL. And I'll show that to you guys later. Once this is done, I would directly go on the surface part and select Zoom Teams Chat, sorry, Teams Chat, and then scroll down. And by default, this would be disabled. So I will go ahead and enable it and provide my bot endpoint URL. I already have a bot endpoint URL, so I'm going to call it like slash DataStax. But again, bot endpoint URL is where Zoom will notify you every time someone sends a message to your chatbot. So go ahead and hit save. Now, again, we are doing two things in this. One, we are building a Zoom Teams chatbot. And on the other hand, we are also calling APIs. So both of them have different processes. We are done configuring our Zoom Teams chatbot. Then in order to make calls to some of the APIs, you will have to end up adding some scopes. So in this case, you want to go to users because we want to get all our users data. So you want to select permissions like view a user. And then because we're also making calls to the recordings and summary APIs, you want to also select scopes from the permissions from the meeting scope. So for example, I want to get my users meeting summary. And then I also want to get my users cloud recordings. So go in the recordings part and select these options. I think this should be enough. Again, all of these scopes, we've listed it in the README. If we have not, then I'll go ahead and update that in the README. But this is it. Like we have done, we've basically configured our Zoom Marketplace app. So go to the local test. Again, we are testing this app locally. If you intend your app to be used outside of your account, by that, what I mean is, let's say you want to build a chatbot that all the other users on Zoom should be able to use, then you will have to publish that app in the marketplace and you would use your production version of your credentials. But because I'm only going to test it within my own account, I'm using the development credentials. I hit add app now. Assume this is an end user who's trying to authorize your app. This is the screen that they're going to see. And Zoom is going to tell them what permissions this integration is requesting from their account. So in this case, it's asking the user to basically permission. It's asking permission from the user to list the chatbot into their Zoom account. And then it's going to ask for permissions to get the user details, the recording details, and meeting summary details. So basically, we're going to give like these three permissions. And once I hit allow, it will send my user to the OAuth redirect URL that I mentioned previously, and it's going to spit out a code. You're going to use this code to generate an access token. And basically, you're going to use that access token to make API calls to get the data from the Zoom API. Once your app is authorized, you should be able to see this app here within your Zoom chat. So as you can see, my app has been authorized and I can now see my app here. That's from me. On to you, David. I'm going to
Oh,
stop sharing my screen right now.
alrighty. Cool. All right. So we've got some basic, Ojus is showing, right? We've got the basic Zoom setup. Obviously, we need to apply some tokens and things like that. No different, honestly, from the DataStax API standpoint. So here, let me go ahead and share my screen. And then, of course, if I can get a nice thumbs up and everything. Hey, Ojus, how did you get the chatbot endpoint? I think we're going to actually talk about that here in a moment, but is there...
Oh, yes, that's a good question. Sorry, I should have walked people
Do you want me to
through
share
our.
back you want to grab it real quick so you can walk them through?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
let's
that's a
do
very
that.
good question.
Okay,
I
go for it.
apologize for missing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, by the way. By the way, keep your questions coming and definitely put your
Yes,
questions in the Q&A.
yes,
And then we'll try to address them, but absolutely keep them coming, please.
absolutely. So if you go to GitHub, you should be able to see our code.
I'll
And
paste
what
it
we
here.
have done is we currently in this implementation, I'm using ngrok. So what ngrok does is it exposes my local host to the web, to the internet, and created my own endpoint, which is called slash DataStax. Uh, 1 second, I'm trying to share my screen here. Uh, Here. So if you guys can see my code, I have created this endpoint which is data stack. So as I said, like I've opened my local host to the web. So my endpoint looks something like here.
And if you're not familiar with ngrok, by the way, I learned about ngrok for this project. I was not actually, familiar with it before, but it's a really cool service that allows you to expose an endpoint essentially to the internet, right? Ngrok provides the service that exposes your endpoint to your local machine, to the internet. So we'll show it here in a moment. I think Ojus, that's what you're doing right now. Ngrok
Yeah,
essentially will allow that, and what he's going to put in for his endpoint, that'll go through ngrok and then hit his local machine in this case.
exactly, exactly. Thank you for that, David. And so that is how I was able to get the chatbot endpoint. Um and this is what my ngrok looks like. Basically, I was able to, expose my local host, which is like 4,000 to the web. And then it gave me this endpoint. Again, I have like a paid version of ngrok that will allow me to have my own subdomain. If you do not have a paid version, you can still open like a temporary domain. It'll just look something very different than this. Um, but yeah, I got this URL and then I just appended the slash data stack endpoint to it, and I hit save. So now every time my chatbot sends a message, it will be received on that endpoint and then forwarded it to me. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, I think so, but if not, go ahead and post the chat.
Yeah.
Alrighty, cool.
Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and if you're good, Ojus, I will grab the screen. Thank you, thank you. All right, is everybody seeing my screen? You should see kind of like um, a visual flow tool. Yes, thank you, Don. Great, excellent. R. Benson, thank you so much. Okay, so here's what I want to do. First thing off the beat and off the path here is so given what Ojus just explained before we get into the Gen AI part and everything like that, he was just showing you a second ago that he had some code that had a path slash data stacks, right? And actually, if I pop over to the code real quick, so in our app, we have both a combination of front end code with JavaScript and back end code with Python, right? Probably no surprise that is definitely a pattern today. So the things that you see with the interaction with the bot is actually going to come in through that front end code in the server.js, right? That you see here. And again, this is the same code that, Ojus was just showing a second ago, this slash data stacks. The reason why I want to point that out is going to become apparent in a moment when you see the interaction with the bot. Slash data stacks then down the chain of the JavaScript code is responsible for calling the Python code, which is what is interacting with our Gen AI flow, the RAG portion of this. So if I come back over to the setup on the left-hand side, this is actually my team chat, just like what Ojus was showing. I have a development app, this general app 392, that has been configured here. And what I want you to notice is this address. So you see 8785, -42, and then my ngrok is configured. That is the one it's pointing to, right? Now to get started, I'm going to go ahead and say update. So one of the pieces of functionality, you remember Ojus was talking about those APIs, right? So what's happening is when we say update, then it's right now that bot went and it talked to the Zoom APIs, right? The ones that Ojus was talking about. it's iterating through, getting transcriptions, getting summary data. Now, to be clear, this data set that we're using is all like test data. Oh, just I don't know if you pulled it from like conversations you had with like your team, or if you like, because it actually has like real information in it, but we purposely didn't want to expose like anybody's real stuff, right? That would be kind of proprietary. So we used a test data set, but you saw it there, kind of iterated through. So what it was doing is collecting all the data, and then this little part where you see the zoom to Astra. I like ASCII art. I can't help myself with that kind of stuff. So this is calling the Python, right? And what I want to point out right here is this guy creating Astra database collection user logs, right? And so what's happening there, you're going to see this in a second. So this is at the point we're now taking the data from the Zoom API and we're putting it into our database in Astra. And now though, I can actually start asking questions. I can say like, what is Ojus working on? Oh, I love how it corrected me because I totally fat fingered that. Right. And you can see, boom, you can see the request went here. You can see it's making the call. Now, in this case, what it's actually doing, it's actually making a call out to the Gen AI bot, the RAG portion of this. And you can see it's telling us something. So we've got everything kind of hooked up end to end, right? And all right, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to pop over to like I just glossed over a bunch of stuff, right? I just talked about this Gen AI flow and we're storing things in the database. So I want to break that down. Now, if you remember a moment ago, I was talking about a collection called user logs, right? You saw that come up in the code. So why don't we talk about what you see here? So the DataStax AI platform has two main components. One is AstraDB, which is a fully fledged database that has been optimized for vector storage and retrieval and such like that. So on the vector end, so it means that it can store all of your data, any of your data, even your non-vector data, but then it has the ability to natively store and do vector searches and things like that, right? So what's happening is, as you noticed, when I ran that update, right, you see this data that's in here. Now, there's a couple things going on with what you see in the data. One, this one is actually a vector collection that we're using for this. And if I actually pop over to the code, I just want to show a little bit of the setup. Now, a lot of what's going on in here is just kind of checking you have certain environment variables, kind of giving you a nice message if you don't have certain things. We do have a .env, an example to kind of give you an idea what you need. Similar to what Ojus was showing with Zoom, you do need like an authentication token and an endpoint, right? Like, where's my database? So if I come over to Astra, if I go to a database that I've created and I go over to Overview, you'll see both on this side you have the API endpoint and the application token. These are the two things you need, right? And that is actually what you're seeing reflected here in our env example, right? And that is the same things that you're seeing us initialize essentially in our Python. But what I want to really kind of come down to is right here. You'll see this little helper function I created called create collection. All it really does is right here. You can see this database create collection, right? This is now using the AstraPy client. So if I'm in a database, and I go over to connection details, you can see I have these various clients. In my case, I'm using Python. And AstraPy is essentially, these clients are wrappers around our data API, right? They just make working with it pretty easy. And so I just need to initialize it with this client and this database. And so that's exactly what we're doing right here, right? You can see us right there. There's a client. That's where I pass in my token. I have this database. That's where I pass in my endpoint. And so that is essentially the pointer to the database and then how I authenticate. But right here, this little chunk, right? This is doing something kind of special. So when we create the collection, and by the way, what I'm doing here in code, this create collection, you don't have to do it in code, right? Could you create the database directly in Astra? Absolutely. But in this case, I like doing this kind of stuff in code where I can kind of control it. That way, from an application standpoint, let's say that the database didn't exist, it would just auto do it, right? But what I really want to point out is this part here. Notice that we're calling this service, this NVIDIA thing with this, you see this provider NVIDIA, model name NV embed QA, and then we're setting how we want to do our vector searches. So what's going on with that, right? So this then kind of, this is actually showing or demonstrating a feature in Astra called vectorize. So I'm actually curious, showing like a show of hands, how many of you here have had to actually, are you familiar with when I say vectorize, or if you want to like generate vector embeddings? I say Omalad, okay, great, raise a hand. Usually what you have to do is you have to go to some service. You go to OpenAI or you go to Mistral or something like that. You get a key from them and you send your data over there. You batch create all your vector embeddings, and then you have to ingest them into your database. In Astra, you don't need to do that. And that's what this feature vectorize is. So if I go to my database here, you'll notice, so I've got my database, my Zmail AstraDB database I created, and then there's this user logs collection. And you see this right here, this MV embed QA model. So what's happening is if I go to integrations, you can see we have these integrations with all these different providers. Now, in the case of like OpenAI or Hugging Face or Mistral or whatever, you provide your key, and then you say, yep, I want to use Vectorize with this database, and it'll automatically handle generating your vector embeddings on ingest and at query time. Now, one that's really cool though is this pre-installed one with NVIDIA. So you don't need a key or anything. You can just use it right out of the box, and it's just part of the database. It's free. And that's the one I used here. So what that means, and here's the important step. When we talk to the Zoom API and we pull that data back and store it in the database, well, we want to use this data with our GenAI RAG flow, right? We want to put this in our RAG pipeline. So I need to take the relevant data from all of the chunks I'm going to iterate through, right? From the transcriptions, the summaries, and things like that. And I need to generate the vector embeddings for each of them. So what I want you to notice is these guys. So I have some content here. These are each of the chunks we've pulled out from the Zoom API. If you look at some of these, you'll see that they're literally like summaries, transcriptions, things like that. And what we've done is, since this has vectorize enabled, if I go back to my code real quick, I'll go over load data. Yeah, this is the information Ojus was talking about earlier, but this right here, this $vectorize. So what I'm saying here in my code is I want you to vectorize. I want you to automatically convert whatever this data is into its vector embeddings, right? So then when it ends up in the database, I have my content, and then I have this vector embedding. And if I take a look, by the way, so NVIDIA's embedding model uses like 1024 dimensions. These vary and that kind of deal. But these are these huge arrays that encode contextual and semantic information. So it's taking the chunks of data, right, that we're getting from Zoom, and then we're encoding it into these embeddings, right? And that's what you see here. All right, so let me go ahead and clear that out. Now, why is that important? That gets into the next part, really. Okay, great. So what we've got about 13,000 records that we got from Zoom of, the last set of, all this information. We vectorize all that information, and now we have, if you were to take a look at these, you'd see they're like I said, you could tell they're like meeting summaries and transcriptions. So now what we want to do is we want to hook this data up to a RAG pipeline. Now, that's the other part. This is where the other tool comes into play. So the one on top here is called DataStax Langflow. And by the way, Langflow is an open source project, right? So you can do this in OSS. Like you can go to langflow.org, you can go right to the GitHub repo. You can totally do this on your own without ever having to touch DataStax if you wanted to. And Langflow itself, it is a visual tool that is used to visually build out GenAI workflows in a low code fashion, right? So if you're not a coder, or if you're not familiar with Python or something, you can absolutely build a flow out like this with no code. But if you want to, you can get all the code. You can modify this stuff, all that kind of deal. And if you take a look, you'll see there's all these components where it's model agnostic. There's support for all sorts of models in here. It's also even vector store agnostic, even though I'm obviously using AstraDB today. You'll see there's all sorts of embedding models, all sorts of things. And the point of this is to be, kind of like a one-stop shop for your Gen AI flows where you can just build these things, right? So what we want to do here is we want to take what would be a regular chatbot. We're going to integrate the data that we have here in our vector store. And we'll see what this does. Now, how are we doing on questions, by the way? I wasn't watching the chat. Are we doing okay? It looks like we're okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to pull out real quick, and I'm going to go. So if you're in Langflow, by the way, I'm using the one that's in DataStax Langflow. We provide this as a service. It's just even the free tier, by the way, this is there. So if you create an Astra account and you create a database or whatever, even if not, you'll see these drop downs. You can just go to Langflow. right? So I'm just in the Langflow. I just kind of did a split screen thing to make it a little easy. And this is provided as a service. But like I said, you could do it on your own through the GitHub repo, pip install Langflow or something. Now, when you have Langflow installed, there's all of these different flows that you can use, especially if you're kind of new to Gen AI stuff. These are great templates to start with. There's agentic flows, there's prompt chaining, there's all sorts of things you can get into. But what I'm going to do is I created this basic prompting one. This is actually one of the templates. Um, and really a RAG pipeline. We haven't really talked about RAG. So what is a RAG pipeline? RAG means retrieval-augmented generation. So it is a method that is used to augment the generation of an LLM. I don't know if you saw it. I had a gnat go right there in my face. But it's a method that's used to augment the generation of an LLM in real time using data you've retrieved, in this case, from a vector store, right? So if you take a look at a basic chat bot, is like what you see here, you have some kind of input. This one's a funny one, right? It's talk to me like you're a pirate. This is what's called a prompt, right? This is going to be some set of instructions you can give to the LLM. Then you have some LLM here. It doesn't matter which one, honestly. Um, in this case, I'm using OpenAI with GPT-4o Mini. It could be all sorts of different models. You could literally just drag and drop over here and like plug them in. I'm going to stick with this one though. And then you have some kind of output. So then if I were to come in here, and I think I did this earlier, right? I'd like some rum. I'd like some more rum, even though I misspelled I'd. And you can see the flow running. If I pop out, you'll see it starts to execute. It went through it, right? And great. So I gave it a basic instruction, talk to me like you're a pirate, right? It just can respond to things. It's not getting any context though. If I were to take a look at the prompt again, there's nothing about context here. So what we're going to do is we can take a basic chat prompt like this and modify it really easily to make it a RAG bot. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come back over to our Zoom one. All right, now this is that flow we were looking at. And if you ignore these two things for a second, notice we have a chat input, we have our prompt, we have an LLM, and we have an output. So we're just modifying a regular chatbot, essentially. But it does do some special things, right? So for one, let's take a look at the prompt, look at the prompt template, I should say. This one's a little bit more filled out, right? We're telling it explicitly, focus on the context, right? You see I've set the context above. By the way, you could take what we're doing here, throw it in ChatGPT, it would absolutely work, right? You can literally take this kind of prompt. As a matter of fact, if I look at what I generated earlier, this is like a filled out one, right? I'll get there in a second. But you could actually take this and just throw it in a ChatGPT, and it would give you a reasonable answer. Okay, so I'm going to ignore chat history for now. We'll get to that. But yeah, so I'm taking this context. I'm going to inject that context. Now the context is the key. This is the part we're going to grab from our vector store, right? And we're just essentially saying, hey, I want you to focus on the context, don't hallucinate, things like that, right? Be succinct. A lot of the LLMs are very chatty. So if you've worked with them, you've probably seen that. And then, hey, I want you to answer my question and give me an answer. And then the other part of this is then the vector store part. So you can see if I come over to vector stores, I have AstroDB is here. There's all sorts of other options. When I pull that over, especially if I'm using the one here in DataStax Langflow, right? It will automatically populate it. Like your token and everything is automatically done for you. So notice here this database. I can select from all of my databases, but Zmail AstroDB. We take a look at this one. You see that's the database I have is Zmail AstroDB. And then the collection is user logs, right? That's that collection that we're working with. So I've essentially just told this thing, hey, I want you to use this collection that we put all this data into. And if you remember, I said that we used vectorize in this case. So we're using the NVIDIA model to automatically vectorize our data on ingest and at query. So let's take a look at something. I can actually, because of that, I can do something like this. What is Ojus working on? And then when I say apply there, boom, check this out. So it took this natural language query, right? The vectorize will convert that into embedding the same embedding space as these, right? Because we're using the same model. And then it will compare it to the rest of the items that we have here in our rag store. And you can see the similarity score. These are pretty highly similar. They're not like exact matches or anything like that, but that's not the point. The point is you can then take this natural language, return back only the relevant parts that we're then going to use to put into the context, right? That's the important thing, because if you think about it, imagine you had like 1,000 documents worth of information or something like that, right? Yeah, and I get this question a lot, by the way. People are like, oh, well, context windows are becoming super huge. Does this even matter? Do I need RAG? Absolutely, right? Because if you, let's say you have like 1,000 documents and you want to throw all that at the LLM, and let's pretend for a second that the LLM had no problem in ingesting all of that. Well, now you pay for all those tokens, and now you are increasing the processing time for the LLM to like process through all that information, right? So what RAG does for you is it allows you to only pull out the relevant results out of that whole data set. Remember, we have like 13,000 rows in here. So when I run this, I'm only pulling out the most relevant items based on the question that I asked, right? And then what it's going to do, by the way, you'll see here these red guys. These are data objects. So you notice that I have an ingested field and a text field. All I really want to get is the text. So I use this parse data to parse that text out, right? I can parse the text out so you can see the transcriptions, right? You can see it's pulled out some subset of the transcriptions that we want to use. And then it's going to inject that directly into our context. So if you remember before, when we looked at our template, the context was empty. We're inspecting now the generated one. So it's the same exact thing we had before. It's the instruction, but now we have all of this context we didn't have before. And then that allows us to actually get an answer, right? So now the bot has some knowledge about the thing we're talking about and can actually give us an intelligent answer. And so when if I come back over here, right, and you saw what I was doing before. Now, by the way, I want to be clear. The question I asked here is not the same one you're seeing here, right? Because I can call the API under the hood and I'm executing this flow, but it's not going to show those messages. I went into the playground and I actually like, typed something in so we could kind of like walk through that. But you could go both ways, really. Yeah, so when we're in the bot and we asked a question like this, right? And I could say like, please summarize let's see if Ojus has been busy. Um, Please summarize Ojus's tasks, right? And now it's going to go through that flow that you see, right? And it's going to go ahead and go through the LLM. It's going to do all that generation, and then you can see, some of the things that he's working on. You can start to have this conversation with your meeting summary and your transcription data. Now, you might be wondering, well, okay, great. I see you're doing things in here, but how is this all hooked up? How are you connecting this, right? And so this is only as good as like, you got to be able to hook an application up to this stuff. If you take a look up here in the top right, you'll see this API. So, there's all sorts of options. There's this endpoint API that you can use, or API endpoint that you can use. It doesn't matter what language, but we have auto-generated Python and JavaScript for you. So if you come into the Python one, you'll see that it actually auto-generates for your flow. And all of the key information that you need is right here, right? But all of this, like these tweaks, by the way, tweaks, just so you know, like every one of the parameters that are in these things, they're all tweakable. You can tweak them at runtime. You're not stuck with the ones that are here in the UI. This is just to build the thing out. But when you're running, like one that I actually have used is the model name. Sometimes I may want to use a different model depending on what I'm doing. I can just set that in my code, right? I can just set that as I go. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so then the other part of this is this run flow. Again, this is being generated for you. Why I want you to see that is because now when we come over to our Zoom AI bot, right? This is, by the way, when we're asking questions here, underneath the hood, it's actually calling that Zoom AI bot. So that's the Python in the back that it's calling. But this is that same method. It's just grabbing this. I've added a little bit of logic here that allows you to switch between what's called either the flow ID or the endpoint. A really cool feature, by the way. If you're in a flow here and you go to its settings, you can set an endpoint name. This is a super cool feature because what it allows you to do is it allows you to have a consistent human readable name you can just reference as an endpoint. So no matter where you move your flow, I do this all the time. Like if I have a development flow and I want to promote it to prod, or if I duplicate it or something, I'm going to generate a new flow ID every time. So this allows me to essentially have a consistent name that I can always reference. And that's how I prefer it. So you'll see that this is in the code. And as a matter of fact, if you looked at my actual my real.env, you'd see that I set my my endpoint, but I'm not going to show you those because it actually gives away like, you know, the real tokens and stuff to the stuff. Anyway, okay, great. So then we go through, we're saying, hey, what's the input? This is the message that we're sending in, right? This is all part of that generated code from the API tab. We're passing in any tweaks that we have, right? We pass in our application token because we need some way to authenticate, and then we get some response, right? And so we're calling run flow here. We get the response. It's JSON output that you get, right? And then we return that back out. And so that is what you're seeing here, right? So that is the part that we've essentially parsed out from that payload. So now we can just ask all sorts of questions against this data. And instead of, again, having to, one, pay for the cost of all of those tokens, if we were to just try to throw everything into it, or, you know, just the processing time, it actually decreases a lot of that because the database is super efficient at being able to store and retrieve this kind of stuff, right? That's what databases are really good at. So I can store this, you know, larger corpus of data here, and then just rely on the GenAI flow here to tie this all together. Now, let me see. I'm just looking for questions. How are we doing? Oh, I do see some stuff in the Q&A there, Ojus. What do we have? Yes, Barath, you can absolutely use Azure OpenAI. So if you take a look at here, I want to see it. There it is. Yeah, that's the same kind of deal. I should answer that live, by the way. There we go. Yes, so you can absolutely do that. And Barath, currently, do you have any partnership with Adobe already? I'm not sure, actually. I don't know of one. But you know something? At the end, we're going to show some LinkedIn. I have my LinkedIn in a QR code. By all means, reach out because if you notice, I'm glad you asked that question, Barath. You'll see these bundles down here. These are folks that have all created various capabilities in Langflow, right? And what's super cool about that, I'm glad you asked that question, is before I mentioned that you can modify this code, so you're not limited to what is only in the components we have. Matter of fact, if I say custom, oh, that's right. We literally just released a brand new version like last week, Thursday, and they changed it. There we go. Here's new custom component. So this is like a template that you can use to kind of like build these things out. By the way, a really cool thing, both ChatGPT and Copilot are wonderful with taking the code from these. You can just take this code and say, using this template, I want you to do this. It does a really nice job of generating these. But yeah, you can modify and you can create whatever you want. So whether it's Adobe or whatever, if you have like functionality that you think that would be useful in here, like absolutely. Yeah, please reach out from that standpoint. All right, let's see. All right, I do see. Oh, I love that. I love that, Hugh. Yeah, yeah. So Adobe may be some kind of partner. I'm just not aware of that for Langflow or whatever. I'm not sure what the relationship is there, Hugh. Um, okay, good. All right, I think, and do we see one more thing in the Q&A? We got that one. Okay, great. All right, so now the last part of this, I mentioned I glossed over. So that, if we did nothing else, would be part of the like the basic RAG-bot, right? We have our regular chatbot, but we have a vector store that we use to essentially inject into context, right? We're injecting into context. And to be sure, this value that you see here, this context, this input, all it is notice the curly braces, right? Notice curly braces. So in Langflow, if I encapsulate any value in curly braces, it will automatically expose it as like an interface like this, right? So that's where those names came from, and you just wire it up. So I'm telling it this is the context. Depending on how you write your prompt template, you may do something a little different, but that's the general idea. But you notice there's this other one here, this chat history, right? So it's important, especially if you're dealing with like a chatbot, you don't probably want it to record the history the same for everybody, right? Like if I'm talking in my session, and then Hugh, for example, gets on in his session, and then all of a sudden he can like ask about like things we talked about, and it's talking about my session, that's probably not that useful, right? That actually, I don't know, maybe depending on the app, that could be a feature or a bug. But in this case, we want to ensure that we're differentiating between different users and different sessions. So there are some other components in here that are meant specifically for that particular task. So you see at the end of my output, this is the message that I'm getting back out, right? So this is the message that I'm getting back out from the bot. Well, if I'm going to go ahead and store this in my database in a way that I can have some history, then I want to store that the bot output. So you can see if I scroll up here, I have the store message component. And then I'm hooking it up to external memory. I could use internal memory in LangFlow, but I want to use external memory. And I want it to talk to AstroDB. And so you'll notice there's another table here, chat history, right? That's exactly what this is. So you see these Zastrobots. This is the session ID that we set for our application. As a matter of fact, if I pop over here, if I go down, here it is. You'll see that guy right there. Now, this is if we were coming in from Zoom. You can actually run this as just a local bot as well. So I made a distinction between those two things, right? So I'm just setting that session ID, and you can see both of these are in here. So that allows me to differentiate between these users. All right, so here you see that's the output. I also want the messages that are coming in. So you'll see that as well, the message that I ask from the output, I'm going to wire that all the way up. And I have another store message, and it's also hooked up to my external memory. And then the last one here is this one, this chat memory. This is the one that's responsible for a particular session ID of pulling back. In this case, I said, just give me the last 10 messages. You can make it 100 or something, but this is the one that is responsible for a particular ID of pulling out only the messages that are relevant for that ID. So that way, if I had multiple users, they can have that interaction, and it's specific to them. So you notice the one last thing I did here in my prompt, oops, I moved my thing, is you'll see that I have this not just context, but I also specify chat history. And so if you look at the generated one, the one that we generated, you can see as I was talking with it, right? Then it's going to start pulling that history in. And so, if I come over to our bot here and let's say, what were we talking about earlier? Now, I didn't ask it too much stuff in this one. This is a brand new session. So it may not have too much to say, honestly. But yeah, right. You can see that we were discussing an interactive AI bot project that Ojus is working on, right? And that's part of the questions I was asking it. So again, it makes the bot a bit smarter. Especially if you're having like longer-winded conversations, similar to what might happen when you're in like ChatGPT and you see like memory updated, or if you're in Copilot or something like that, and you wanted to remember the conversations you were having. Alrighty, so that was a lot of ground. How are we doing? I see some Q&A. How are
There
we
are like
doing
two
here?
very like I think Stephen has asked a very important question. I'd like to know this too.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Here, I'm going to answer this live. Some of the queries you were asking, i.e., summarize what Ojus is working on, seem to require letting the LLM see all the Zoom chats. How does the RAG concept handle this scenario? Somehow sampling a subset of the vectorized content, or yeah, that's a great question. So you're right that it is technically exposed to all of the chats, but what's happening is when I say something like, what is Ojus working on? Okay. It's actually when it converts this into a vector embedding, right? What's going to happen is other things that have, let's say, the name Ojus, right? Working on so it's not like a keyword search. It doesn't just match for Ojus. It's actually looking semantically and contextually at
Semantically.
that data depending on the embedding model, and then it's comparing it to the other vector embeddings that are similar to it. So you'll find that if I go ahead and I do that search, you'll see a lot of Ojus stuff in here, right? So in like working on compared to like if I asked him like who's Ojus working with or who are his team members, right? So you've got this comparison, this like again, this contextual and semantic comparison that's happening at the vector embedding level. And that is how it is able to look at this larger corpus of data and only pull back the stuff that's more relevant for what you're looking at, right? Let me see. I want to make sure I really answered that. Stephen, did that kind of get at the crux of what you were curious about? I want to make sure I answered what you were looking for. Yeah, and so the RAG concept. So as you're building up like data in your RAG bot or your RAG system, um, and you build up that corpus of data, the data that you chunk, this stuff is important, right? The way that you chunk and the way that you look at that is important. But again, this one's definitely going to go off like a keyword, like a name in that case. Okay. So yeah, sort of. Ojus isn't implicit, given that these are his. Yeah, so Ojus, that's a great question for you. I know this is like test data, right? But these look like actual real conversations you were having with somebody, from what I've seen. Where did that come from?
So basically, it was just a recording of like me trying to get onto a meeting and getting us because we wanted some data. I just got onto a
Ah,
meeting, had my friend get over, and we were just talking a lot of things. Mind if I walk people through the architecture real quick again?
yeah, go for it. I'll stop sharing
Okay.
because I know we've got 4 minutes. Go for it.
Okay. Okay. So, just to give you an idea, guys, again, if people joined late, what is happening is we are making a bunch of API calls, like API calls to like some of the Zoom APIs. So in this case, we're one second, I'm just going to directly go. Yeah. So in this case, what we were doing is we were getting a list of all the users within my Zoom account. So I have my own test Zoom account, which I use for like testing purposes. So what it did was it got a list of all the users within that account. And then because only one user was real in that, it got ended up getting a list of all my previous recordings. Again, those weren't the real recordings. It was just like a random meeting that I got onto. I started the recording on, and I covered some random stuff into that meeting. But at the end of the day, what happened was a VTT file for those recordings was created. And then a meeting summary was also generated for those meetings.
Hmm.
We basically made an API call to those two APIs. We got that specific data from that APIs, and what we did was we went ahead and we basically just pushed all of that data into DataStax. And yeah, again, before pushing the data into DataStax, we made sure that the data is converted into this format. So tomorrow,
Right.
if you want to go ahead and use this integration as is, it may or may not work depending on whether you actually have that data in your account. So let's say if you do not have meeting recordings from the past, or you did not turn on meeting summarizer for your past meetings, then that specific data will not be inputted into data.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, and also know that before inputting all of the data into data stacks and trying to query that data, make sure you want to give access to that data as well. So if there
Right.
is some meetings that you do not want to give access to, you might want to put a logic that excludes those kind of meetings, and all that stuff. So just be like careful about all of that stuff. Again, especially the logic that I built, I went ahead and pushed all my data to DataStax because that was just a test data, that was just dummy data. But yeah, if you want to do it in any other ways, make sure to basically add that logic into the sample app.
Got it. Cool. Okay. I think oh wait, I turned on yeah, sorry. I think we've gotten everything in QA that I see. And thank you, Dawn. Thank you very much. Yep, we're actually just about at time. Ojus, you wanna close us off? I know you had a couple slides there. Matter of fact, I think the most important one is the connection slide. So if you guys want to connect with us, or if you all want to connect with us, yeah, you've got some
Yeah.
resources.
Yeah. Before that, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and check out our award-winning documentation, which is at developers.zoom.us. Oh,
I love
trust me,
it.
we won the
I
Best
love it.
API award recently at Postman last month. And not last month, sorry, back a few months back. So yeah, please go ahead and check out our award-winning documentation. We have a bunch of sample apps on our GitHub, so go and check them too. And of course, if you want to connect with us, feel free to scan those links. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to either of us. We'll be more than happy to.
Yeah, and Ojus, a question that came up a couple times, and Lucas just asked is, can you share the presentation link? I was actually going to ask, can we just include that in the repo?
I can do that. I'll just have to maybe create like a new version of this presentation, and yes, I'd
Okay.
be happy to share the presentation link as well.
Excellent. And the GitHub repo that I shared there in the chat, Hugh also pointed out that there is the Sonic DMG repo. Just to be clear, right? The Ojus Save repo is the main one. I forked when we were working together, as part of this collaboration, right? Like, I forked off of what Ojus originally had started, and then we collaborated that way. So while you can look at my fork, and it should be as up to date as Ojus is the main repo, so I would use that one. Yeah, the recording and everything will be shared later. You will get a follow-up email from this event. And it's going to give you some resources and recording and all that. All right. Do we have any other questions? Thank you. I think we're right at time. Thank you, Ojus, so much. Like this has actually been a super fun project. It was really fun. I found to actually have these conversations with my Zoom chats in particular, actually Ojus, because I've been really been talking with Ojus. Whether he knew it or not for a while. So no, this has been super cool. Thank you everybody for your attentiveness and your questions and everything. And with that, take care. Ojus, thank you. See you everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.